There's been a lot of talk about the Cincinnati Bengals and their slow starts over the past couple of seasons. And on one hand, I agree with most of what people say. You know, you can't start a season 0-3 and expect to make the playoffs. And especially when you lose a game at home to start the year to a team like the New England Patriots, who ended up in the top 5 of the draft this year. But on the other hand, I'm more interested in 4 games last year that were later on in the season that I think really dashed the Bengals' chances at making the playoffs. You start with the 2 games against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, there's a common theme in both of these games. Both times it was a shootout between Cincinnati and Baltimore. And in both of these games, it basically came down to the final play. In Week 5, Baltimore won on a game-winning kick from Justin Tucker in overtime. However, about 3 minutes of game time before that, Evan McPherson of the Bengals missed a 53-yard field goal to win it. A kick that is well within his range and a kick he has made many times before in pretty similar situations. In the second game against Baltimore, this time in Baltimore, the Cincinnati Bengals scored a touchdown in the last 30 seconds of the game to bring the score within 1. Then head coach Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow decided to go for 2 and go for the win. And the pass attempt to Tanner Hudson and the incompletion that came from that pass attempt sealed a pretty heartbreaking loss for Cincinnati. Then the next week, the Cincinnati Bengals were really hard to try to win on the road at the LA Chargers, and they allowed the Chargers to go from their own 16 all the way down the field to score a touchdown in the span of about 27 seconds. It was highlighted by 2 plays from Ladd McConkey, where he took the Chargers from their own 16 to the Cincinnati 29. And again, about the span of 19 seconds. And finally, Week 13 was the last loss of the season for the Bengals, but it was easily the one that Cincinnati, in my opinion, should be thinking about the most. It was a game in which the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team somewhat known last year for having an average to maybe even below average offense, that team put up a whopping 44 points on Cincinnati, including 3 touchdown passes from Russell Wilson. And so long story short, the common theme throughout all of those games, even though there were times where the offense had moments where they could have done more, or, a kick goes Cincinnati's way instead of the other team's way. But I think what's more common is the Bengals' defense last year did not just let down the offense, they quite possibly were the most detrimental and negative group I have seen in a long time. I mean, when you add in the fact that between Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, the Bengals had by far the best passing attack in the entire league, and a defense that performs that poorly, allows that many points, allows so many drives, and I bring up that Pittsburgh Steelers game, there was multiple drives where the Steelers went 70 yards down the field and scored a touchdown. That was just not something that Pittsburgh was doing on an average game-to-game basis. And against Cincinnati, it seemed like they were doing it with ease. And before it even gets commented, yes, Trey Hendrickson's sack total was gaudy last year, but it almost means nothing. When a group as a whole performs as poorly as this one did, one individual getting one statistic is a very useless conversation point. And not to go too deep in the weeds on this conversation, but this is what, in my opinion, makes his contract demands to me seem very difficult to the Bengals. I mean, from the perspective of the team, why would anyone on this group feel like they should get rewarded for last season when they, in many games last year, were somewhat the sole reason for some of these losses last year? I think it was these shortcomings from the Cincinnati defense that made them kind of look in the mirror and realize changes needed to be made. It started with replacing longtime defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo with Al Golden, who for the last 3 seasons has been the defensive coordinator with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and has actually had his own personal history with the Cincinnati Bengals as a linebackers coach. The Bengals also said goodbye to Sheldon Rankins, Akeem Davis-Gaither, and Jermaine Pratt as some of their more notable free agency losses on the defensive side of the ball. And in their place, the Bengals signed TJ Slayton from the Green Bay Packers and Oren Burks from the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Burks was more of a depth piece throughout the regular season, but after Nakobe Dean had an injury, Oren Burks stepped up as the middle linebacker for that team and helped lead this team and that defense to a Super Bowl. Cincinnati also invested a lot of draft capital into the defense with Shamar Stewart, Demetrius Knight, and Barrett Carter all coming to the team. Now, somewhat in the same vein of those young draft picks, there are young players on this team who have been first-round draft picks or have had highly valuable draft picks invested into them. Guys like Chris Jenkins, Miles Murphy, Jordan Battle, and a lot of other guys that I think coming off of last year's disappointment with a new system, new scheme with Al Golden, this group of guys can really help make a difference if they step up. And it will kind of offset the fact that the Bengals actually had a pretty quiet offseason on the defensive side of the ball in terms of at least bringing talent to the team. Now, there's been a lot of noise with guys' contracts. But in terms of actually bringing guys to this team, there's not a lot new here. The offense didn't have much going on in the offseason either, but that actually makes sense. And even with as little as they did, they still added at their most needed position, which was along the offensive line. Dylan Fairchild comes in from the third round, and with Amarius Mims coming into the second year for himself, there's a hope that Joe Burrow is behind the future of the offensive line. Lucas Patrick also comes in as a longtime veteran and someone that can really help stabilize the group. I mean, other than that, it's Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. It really doesn't take a genius to say that this offense is going to be great again. The only question is just how great are they actually going to be? Unfortunately, I see a pretty similar year to 2023 and 2024 for Cincinnati. You look at the first 4 weeks of the season, and I think we're going to have a pretty similar conversation that we had last year, and this is going to be possibly a slow start. And there's probably going to be a loss in there to a team that Cincinnati is better than, whether it's Cleveland, Jacksonville, or Minnesota. That's, you're good for one loss in your first few weeks of the year. It's just whether or not they actually win a couple of those games or not. If they lose multiple out of those first 3 weeks, you could probably already chalk this season up as a loss. Because when you look at the year after that, it gets way more difficult. You have a 3-week stretch where you go to Green Bay, host Detroit, and then you go to Denver, host Detroit, and then go to Green Bay. You have a few weeks in there where you have Pittsburgh, the Jets, and the Bears. But then after that, you go to Pittsburgh, host New England, go to Baltimore and Buffalo, then host Baltimore. And I think week after week when you tally it up, Cincinnati offensively is just not going to be able to keep up with the other team's offense because their defense, it's young and you hope it's improved, but that might not be saying much because this defense was really bad last year. And if it's a minimal improvement, they're still going to be pretty bad. And going against the wide receiver groups that they're going to have to go against, going against the quarterbacks that they're going to have to go against, I just don't see this being a great year for Cincinnati. Now, if the offense is just head and shoulders better than anybody else they play this year, they could still win 10 or 11 games. They could still find their way to win the AFC North. They could still find a way, even if it's in the wild card round, to win a couple playoff games and make a run at the Super Bowl. Things can change throughout the regular season. Trades could happen. Guys could get added to this team defensively. But I think they're really going to have to win games offensively. They're not going to have a strong running game to rely on, but I don't think Cincinnati is necessarily going to need that. We saw when they brought back Samaje Perine, they kind of have their plan. Chase Brown is going to be the guy to get 10 to 15 carries a game. Samaje Perine's going to be in there as a pass blocker, an occasional catcher out of the backfield. But, running back is just not going to be what's highlighted on this offense. And so, again, like I said, they could find a way to win the division, get into the playoffs. But I would not be surprised to also see this team with possibly a losing record and looking from the outside in for the third straight year at the playoffs.